All right, let's jump right into this explainer, where we are going to untangle the completely wild, decades-long cinematic journey of everyone's favorite web slinger. Today, we're looking at a fascinating story that is just the perfect blend of cutthroat corporate strategy, bitter legal battles, and brilliant creative reinvention. It is literally the story of how Spider-Man swung from the pages of Marvel comic books to absolute, undeniable global box office domination.
And when I say domination, I'm talking about a sheer scale that's almost hard to wrap your head around. Spider-Man is the second highest grossing film franchise of all time, collectively pulling in over $11 billion globally. That's a staggering number, right? Especially when you consider that for a really, really long time, Peter Parker couldn't even manage to get a movie made.
So you kind of have to wonder, how exactly did a superhero whose film rights were just constantly tossed around between bankrupt studios for decades actually become the ultimate Hollywood cash cow? Well, it definitely wasn't a straight line. In fact, it was one of the messiest developmental periods in Hollywood history, just completely full of overlapping licensing agreements and high-stakes lawsuits.
To make sense of it all, we are going to chart this incredible evolution through 5 distinct eras: a tangled legal web, the Raimi Revolution, the amazing reboot, entering the MCU, and expanding the Spider-Verse. Starting right off with Era 1, a tangled legal web. Decades of development hell. You see, before Peter Parker could actually swing onto the big screen, he was trapped in this absolute labyrinth of legal disputes throughout the 1980s and 90s. It was chaos. The rights bounced from the Cannon Group, who bought them for $225,000 in 1985, over to Carol Co. Pictures for $5 million just a few years later. Then, amid a bunch of bankruptcies and lawsuits, they ended up at MGM. It actually wasn't until 1999 that a judge finally stepped in, cleared the slate, and reverted the rights back to Marvel, which opened the door for a brand new player.
And here's where it gets crazy. In 1999, Sony and its subsidiary, Columbia Pictures, swooped right in and settled with Marvel. They secured the Spider-Man film rights for a mere $7 million. Now think back to that $11 billion figure we just talked about. This $7 million deal stands as one of the most unbelievable returns on investment in entertainment history, no question. Which brings us to Era 2, the Raimi Revolution, the triumphant rise. With the legal red tape finally totally cleared out, Sony tapped director Sam Raimi to bring the hero to life. They cast Tobey Maguire in the lead, and wow, the 2002 original absolutely exploded. It grossed $825 million globally, which fundamentally proved to Hollywood that superhero movies were a highly viable, extremely lucrative genre. The team followed it up with immense success, even snagging an Oscar for Best Visual Effects with Spider-Man 2. But, Hollywood can be incredibly brutal. Even with all that massive box office success, this golden era came to a sudden, screeching halt. Sam Raimi ultimately withdrew from the franchise because he felt he couldn't rectify some major story problems in time for the studio's really strict production schedule. That abrupt departure ended the Maguire era on the spot, prompting Sony to just completely cancel the fourth film in January 2010. Let's move into Era 3, the amazing reboot, basically the dark night of the soul for the franchise. So, Columbia initially wanted to just seamlessly keep that Raimi train rolling. They wanted a fourth, fifth, and sixth film. But reality set in, and they were forced into a massive strategic pivot to keep the franchise alive. They brought on director Mark Webb specifically to craft a totally modern origin story, and decided to cast mostly unknown actors at the time, which is exactly what led them to Andrew Garfield. And Andrew Garfield, who, by the way, took a $500,000 starting salary, really brought this fantastic, modern outcast energy to the role. The 2012 reboot actually performed pretty well, pulling in $758 million. But then the 2014 sequel dropped, and it completely failed to replicate that initial success. That underperformance was a devastating blow, totally throwing Sony's really expansive, ambitious spin-off plans into absolute jeopardy. All right, Era 4, entering the MCU, the resurrection. Desperate to rehabilitate the character and, of course, keep the franchise profitable, Sony looked to a former rival. In 2015, they struck a truly groundbreaking deal. Marvel got to integrate Spidey into their massively successful cinematic universe, while Sony kept full creative control and the studio profits. In exchange, Marvel earned the right to reduce their annual royalty payments based on how well the films performed. It was an incredibly unique, completely unprecedented Hollywood partnership. Now, they needed a new Peter Parker, and to find him, the studio scouted an unbelievable 1,500 auditioning actors. The finalists actually had to screen test for on-screen chemistry directly with Robert Downey Jr., and Tom Holland ultimately beat out that massive competition to win the role, signing a massive six-picture deal. He made his truly spectacular debut in 2016's Captain America: Civil War, effortlessly integrating Spider-Man directly into this larger superhero universe. And guys, the financial climax of this hero's journey is just completely off the charts. Look at how these box office numbers literally skyrocket. Homecoming reestablishes the character with $880 million. Then Far From Home shatters the billion-dollar mark. And all that incredible momentum culminates in No Way Home, which pulled in an astonishing $1.92 billion. And what drove that insane spike? Well, it was pure cinematic magic. They used a multiverse narrative that literally brought Maguire and Garfield right into Holland's world. It honored the entire cinematic history we just covered, uniting completely different generations of fans in theaters everywhere. Which brings us to our final era, expanding the Spider-Verse, creative transcendence. Because as it turns out, live action wasn't the only place the franchise was reinventing itself. Enter the animated Spider-Verse films. Led by Shameik Moore voicing Miles Morales, these movies exist entirely independently from any live-action timelines. They completely shattered visual expectations, becoming the very first non-Disney film to win the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature in 7 years. And boom, it immediately spawned multiple spin-offs and sequels. Simultaneously, Sony is still aggressively maximizing that original $7 million investment from 1999. They are building a totally separate live-action continuity dubbed Sony's Spider-Man Universe, or the SSU. By releasing films based entirely on secondary canon characters, they're basically proving that this franchise IP is practically a bottomless well. Which leaves us with one really massive, lingering question to think about. Considering we have ongoing MCU films, SSU spin-offs, and Beyond the Spider-Verse currently in the works across all these different timelines and actors, what do you think the ultimate cinematic version of Spider-Man is going to look like in the years to come? The web just keeps expanding, and I, for one, absolutely cannot wait to see where it catches us next. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.